The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Tracy Cook and I'm with Sachs Healthcare Communications. I'd like to show our audience today how to send in your questions, which our speaker will answer as many as possible at the end of the webinar. Please type your questions directly into the questions box. Our moderator for our webinar today is Bridget Joseph. Dr. Joseph is the CEO of Thrive in LLC Healthcare Consulting, a certified clinical nurse specialist with a focus in cardiac resuscitation. She has previously been a resuscitation committee chair, in which she implemented many quality improvement initiatives and published research related to all aspects of resuscitation. She has worked as the Director of Simulation Education at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. Additionally, she has worked in a variety of fields and specialties as a legal nurse expert consultant and an interprofessional education IPE consultant. Dr. Joseph has been an invited speaker at numerous medical conferences, nationally and internationally. Bridget, welcome.
Thank you, Tracy. What a lovely introduction, and good morning, good afternoon for all of you guys with us here today. So the title of today's webinar is Roadmap for Improving CPR and Outcomes, the Children's Hospital of Orange County Success Story. And our speaker is none other than Miss Jen Hayes. So Ms. Hayes is currently the supervisor of the resuscitation program at CHOC, Children's Hospital of Orange County. And she oversees CHOC's resuscitation program, including a pre-arrest prevention, RRT processes, code team, resuscitation quality, post-arrest care and education. And she's also been highly effective in promoting early recognition and management of deteriorating patients, high quality resuscitation, and improved outcomes following cardiac arrest. And if that's not all, she also facilitates a coordinated multidisciplinary team effort to ensure resuscitation quality, optimal code team performance, and patient outcomes. And Ms. Hayes is also presented at numerous nursing conferences and serves as a resource consultant and liaison for resuscitation for her institution and external agencies. So we're about to get to her talk. However, I wanted to let you know that Ms. Hayes' disclosure is that she's a speaker for the part of the Speakers Bureau for Zoll Medical Corporation. And I know there's a lot of interest about the continuing education. So it's for nurses and respiratory therapists. And this educational webinar has been approved for 1 contact hour, which has been supported by Zoll Medical Corporation. And a link to the CE credits will be available at the conclusion of this webinar. And you're welcome to read all the accreditation statements. But without much further ado, right now, I would like to turn over to Ms. Hayes to drop some knowledge.
Thank you so much, Bridget. And thank you everyone for joining today. I am so excited to be able to share CHOC's journey with you. CPR quality and improving cardiac arrest outcomes is really just such a huge passion of mine. And I'm excited to be able to share this with you today. So our learning objectives, we're really going to take a deep dive. We're going to describe how our approach of continuous learning and creating a culture of resuscitation excellence really helped us significantly improve not only our CPR quality, but ultimately our patient outcomes. And we're going to talk significantly and quite a bit about how we utilize technology and data collection and analysis, as well as training, simulation, hands-on practice to really improve our outcomes. So we all know the AHA chain of survival, and each one of these links has to be incredibly strong to ultimately improve the outcomes for our patients. And so in my role as a supervisor of resuscitation, I have the great privilege of being able to oversee our processes at the Children's Hospital of Orange County that fall into every single one of these links. Today, we're really going to focus on that really foundational link of high quality CPR. But that does not mean that all of the other pieces of our chain of survival are not equally important. Prevention, early access to fibrillation, our advanced resuscitation skills, post-arrest care within the hospital setting, and then the newest one, recovery, and really helping that survivor through the recovery process as they're discharged home and trying to reintegrate back into life. So I would love to be able to give you a step-by-step roadmap like this photo on the screen. Step 1, you do this. Step 2, you do this. Step 3, you do this. But the reality is it looks more like this and sometimes like this. And that may not be all that encouraging, but really what this represents is each of your own institutional cultures, processes, and really making sure that you are really meeting the needs of the culture that you work in. And you're going to come to forks in the roads and things that you have to kind of make a U-turn and try a different approach, and that's okay. Our main goal is trying to really inspire resuscitation excellence. Now, this slide is not meant for you to be able to read. This is really just to show us how much we can focus on. There's so much that we can do. And so choosing that one piece that your organization is going to start with is really where we started. And we started with increasing CPR quality so that we really could create this path, right? This windy road to inspire resuscitation excellence within our institution. So a little bit about where I come from. Children's Hospital of Orange County is a freestanding children's hospital in Southern California. We have 334 patient care beds, 54 critical care beds, which is where the bulk of our cardiac arrest events take place. We have 104 NICU beds and 35 ED beds. And we average about 60 to 70 cardiac arrest events each year. We all know what high quality CPR looks like based off of guidelines, right? The correct rate, the correct depth, full release, minimizing interruptions, and avoiding hyperventilation. And we all know that high quality CPR is absolutely the primary component to influence survival from cardiac arrest. And yet the high quality CPR is shown in multiple studies that it just simply doesn't translate into practice. And I know when we were first starting our journey at CHOC, we looked at this data and we thought there is absolutely no way that we are this bad that that the publications are showing. There's just no way. We're a pediatric center. We do CPR on children. We are dedicated to defending childhood and saving their lives. There's just no way we're that bad. But what we realized is, I love this quote. This is the quote I live by when it comes to my QI work within our institution in resuscitation. Without data, you are just another person with an opinion. And that's exactly what we were. We had an opinion that we were doing amazing, but we had no data on our actual CPR quality to really show that and really prove that. And so we sought and took our initial steps to really want to start collecting this data, because collecting no data in my mind and just thinking we were amazing was far worse than if we collected data that showed horrendous CPR quality. And while it was a little bit eye-opening, it gave us the opportunity to really, truly dive into that data and analyze it and make changes to our process. But I will tell you, as we started, I felt like we were at the beginning, at the bottom of Mount Everest. We didn't have feedback pads for pediatrics. We only had adult feedback pads, which meant we needed to bring a whole new product into the institution. We needed to start transferring data, which required an infrastructure for data transfer, data capture, and data analysis. And so I remember standing at the bottom, what felt like the bottom of this mountain, and thinking, we are never going to get there, because it felt like there was so much to do. And whenever I talk to people and talk to organizations, I always remind everybody that everyone started someplace, right? And all you need to do is pick one data point to figure out what story your data is showing and begin taking the baby steps. Don't feel like you have to do all of it. Choose one thing and focus on that and make it really, really great. So we finally, in our fiscal year of 2017, started to collect our CPR quality data. And to say it was sobering is an understatement. We only collected 6 events, which showed us that our CPR feedback devices were not getting to the bedside effectively, and we really needed a good culture shift to take place. And these were the 6 events, and you can see the quality there, although small, not a single event hit 10% AHA compliant CPR. So our average was 4.1% of our compressions that we delivered to these 6 patients were considered AHA compliant. 71% of them were too fast, 30% of our compressions were too shallow, and 26% of our patients within the institution were surviving to discharge. So we took that data and really identified some key opportunities. The first being, we have got to change our culture. We have to get the CPR feedback device to the bedside every single time for every single patient for 2 reasons. The first most important is to make sure that we are getting feedback and providing high quality CPR, and to make sure that we're capturing that data to be able to then do quality improvement off of it. And the obvious one, we needed to improve CPR quality. The reality here is that survival from cardiac arrest requires perfusion, and perfusion requires high quality CPR. And yet we were not providing that. And I remind everybody that we have one chance to get this right, one chance. And I personally became very aware of the importance of this one chance when my personal and professional lives collided 5 years ago, shortly after taking the resuscitation position that I am currently in. When I was 30 weeks pregnant, I suffered a cardiac arrest at home. And thankfully, my husband and neighbor provided high quality CPR with guidance from the dispatcher until EMS arrived. When EMS arrived, they showed up with a feedback device entitled to guide CPR quality and identified that I was in ventricular fibrillation. I received 2 shocks, an IO, epi, amiodarone, 15 minutes of CPR, and was intubated. So I got the entire ACLS algorithm. And the paramedics later shared with me that they knew they were doing high quality CPR because they followed the feedback and they followed entitled to guide by physiological response to that CPR. I was taken to a local hospital where my pregnancy obviously really complicated the situation. And so I was airlifted to a higher level of care where they decided that the likely cause of my cardiac arrest was eclampsia. And so the cure was to deliver the baby. So in the early morning of November 10th of 2017, our son Micah Hayes was delivered 10 weeks early. He was born limp, gray, and not breathing, weighing 1,600 grams. He received NRP, high quality NRP, was intubated and immediately taken to the neonatal ICU. Following my C-section, high quality post-arrest care started with targeted temperature management, VTM, and blood pressure management. And 4 days after my cardiac arrest, I finally had the opportunity to meet my second son, Micah, in what was a very, very emotional meeting. I do not remember this event well, but I do remember looking at him and thinking, oh my gosh, he is so incredibly small. And knowing that it was nothing short of a miracle that we were both alive. For the next 2.5 months, Micah spent in the NICU. We really celebrated every milestone that he achieved, coming off oxygen, off the ventilator, eating on his own, and gaining weight. And after 71 days in the NICU, Micah was discharged home. If I have to be completely honest, the recovery link in the chain of survival is so incredibly meaningful. The months following my cardiac arrest were incredibly hard. I not only was trying to navigate being a cardiac arrest survivor, but also the mom of a preemie. I had significant short-term memory loss, which had improved. but suffered from frequent panic attacks, postpartum depression, and severe anxiety. I very quickly came to realize that being a survivor was harder than I could have ever imagined it to be. I spent 11 years as a bedside nurse in the pediatric ICU. And anytime a survivor would leave the hospital, I'd think, great, go live your life. We just saved it. And I quickly came to realize that it wasn't that easy. I couldn't go into my son's room alone because that's where my cardiac arrest had happened. And each and every day was filled with the fear that I would have another cardiac arrest and die and leave my family and my boys. So through all of that, the recovery link really means so much because it allows us to really now, as healthcare providers, focus on the long-term integration into life for our survivors. As we navigated the trauma that our family had been through, Micah continued to grow and thrive. At home, he met all of his developmental milestones, and no one would have ever guessed he made such a dramatic entrance into the world. Micah is now 5 years old. I always leave my neurological intactness up to all of those who interact with me, but I can tell you that Micah is a completely normal 5-year-old, is in kindergarten, loves playing ice hockey, and is really the poster child of the outcomes that we have the power to influence. And so I cannot emphasize enough how much our resuscitation quality that we provide matters to the patient and matters to their entire family. And so it's now my mission to make sure that every single cardiac arrest patient out there receives the same exact chance that Micah and I were given. As I returned to work, we really started our work on improving our outcomes, focusing on CPR quality. The first thing that we did, and as I said, before my cardiac arrest, we identified we needed to get our feedback device to the bedside more regularly. And in order to do this, we decided to do a CPR challenge, which gave our staff the ability to do 1 minute of CPR with no feedback, but we collected the data. And then we showed them our institutional-wide data where they have 4.1%, and they said, well, that's awful, but that's not me. That must be him over there or her over there, right? And so then we were able to pull up their actual CPR quality data and show them that, in fact, they may be one of the ones contributing to that 4%. Then we had them do another minute of CPR with feedback turned on the feedback device. And I will say this is a very eye-opening moment for us, because what we identified in that moment was that we can't just put a feedback device at the bedside and expect it to improve our CPR quality. It doesn't matter what device you have. If your staff don't know how to interpret the feedback and make real-time changes, your CPR quality is not going to improve. And we identified that throughout this CPR challenge, and it was really, really eye-opening to us. And so we took the opportunity then during this challenge to really make sure our staff understood all of the feedback they were receiving, what the machine was telling them, what the visual indicators were, and be able to make real-time changes based off of what they were seeing. And then we had them do another minute of CPR with that feedback turned on, and they got to see the impact of their CPR quality improvement. So this little card that's on the screen was a little bit larger than a business card, and this was their takeaway card that we wrote their scores on it, which created really great discussions amongst the clinicians in the unit. And we had anyone, CNA, RN, ED tech, respiratory, physicians, anyone was able to participate in this challenge. And I think one of the most powerful things, besides recognizing the importance of interpretation of the feedback, was as we handed them this card, we said, this top number with no feedback is the CPR quality that you are willingly choosing to provide to your patients if you do not place the feedback pads on during resuscitation? And as you can imagine, that was pretty powerful and got immediate buy-in. And we immediately started to see our feedback pads making it onto our patients at some point during the resuscitation a bit more often. We also embarked on data transparency. So what we found is we had, told the staff, put the feedback pads on. We want the data. We want you to get CPR feedback. And then the data would just go into this big black void, and the staff never got full closure on what that data was showing us. And we felt that it was really, really important to create a culture of data transparency around our resuscitation quality. Excuse me. And so we created these CPR report cards. And what our goal is we pull this data and we try to get this sent out to the staff within a week or two of the event. And with this, we also have trend graphs of our year-to-year CPR quality and a little bit of a healthy competition of unit-to-unit comparisons. And what we found is this was the most powerful change that we made to change the culture within our institution. If I did this all over again, I would have started CPR report cards from the very beginning. Because once we realized that once the staff realized that we were one, looking at it, and two, we're getting that feedback from us with tangible things they could do, tangible things they could improve, they were bought in. Pads all of a sudden started getting on regularly. I would get stopped in the hallway and asked, hey, Jen, have you looked at that event from yesterday? I was one of the compressors. How did we do? I think we did really, really well, but can you look and let us know? And we've even now transitioned into situations where I'll get a phone call after an event and they'll say, can you pull the data? We're going to debrief at 3 p.m. today and we'd really like to review it. And so this data use really made such a powerful impact to our culture. Now, that's not easy to see. So this is that same exact report card. I get a lot of questions about our report cards, primarily around how do you provide feedback when it's 0%? Like, isn't that just a punch in the gut for the staff? And I absolutely can relate to that fear. What I always say is make sure that you're not just telling them, oh, you did 0% quality, better luck next time. Give them very tangible things that they can do to improve that quality. Because while we don't know who compressor number 3 was in this particular case with the bar around it, that compressor knows who they are. And so this is a sample of the feedback that I gave for the report card that's on the screen. So patient was proactively placed on our feedback device. Notice the outline section above. This CPR segment shows compressions that are too fast, too shallow with incomplete and slow release. They all work together. So ensure a rate of 100 to 120 and be very aware of release, which should help you achieve your correct depth. And then the friendly reminder of the physiology. Proper depth is important for perfusing the brain. Quick and full release perfuses the heart and allows the heart to fill for the next compression. So we give them tangible things that they can do. Had 2 pauses greater than 10 seconds. Give them tricks on how to minimize those pauses. Find the pulse during compression. Use our underlying rhythm, EKG rhythm tracing, to look at our underlying rhythm during compression. So we're not just saying, wow, 2 pauses greater than 10 seconds, you should really figure out how to do that better. We're giving the team very, very tangible things that they can do. So this is another event. And so I am going to give you a moment to look at this. Anything that, just to orient you. So this is the depth is here. Rate is here. Compression target is the next one. So that's the compressions in target. And then our release velocity is at the very bottom. And for this adult-sized patient, our depth, anything that is gray is less than 2 inches. Anything that's blue is achieving 2 inches or greater. Same with the rate. So anything in blue is the 100 to 120. Anything outside of that is either above or below. And then for our release velocity, we're going to talk about release velocity in a moment, but our goal is a release velocity of 400 millimeters per second or larger or faster. And so our goal is to have those blue dots in the fast release velocity. So I'm going to give you a moment to look at this and determine what feedback you would give to your staff if this was the CPR event that you were providing feedback on. So if I was giving feedback, I would remind staff that our rate was consistently too high. As our compressors fatigue, we see this upward trend of our depth getting more shallow and leaning, and the release velocity at the bottom starting to decrease. We have all these red segments that our depth is incredibly shallow. Our release velocity is incredibly slow. And so giving all of these compressors very tangible pieces of information. Let's slow down your compressions. Let's focus on fully releasing and then allowing yourself to get that complete depth. And then pointing out the areas that we have compressors that are doing exactly what we want, right? These are compressions that have faster release, are achieving correct depth, are going a little bit slower and within the AHA guidelines. You can see you can take one case with data and make huge amounts of suggestions and a huge amount of learning opportunity from that one case. We also converted to quarterly training for our BLS, PALS, and ACLS, as well as NRP, because as Vince Lombardi said, practice does not make perfect, perfect practice makes perfect. And so at that time, after we implemented all of that, we also turned on the metronome on our CPR feedback device because that was kind of low-hanging fruit with our rate being greater than or too fast, 71% of the time. And we saw a 10-fold increase, which we were thrilled by. The problem was that we were still only providing high-quality AHA guideline-compliant CPR 43% of the time. And I jokingly tell my clinicians, you know, go tell the cardiothoracic surgeon that the ECMO pump is only working 43% of the time, and that's not going to be acceptable. This is not acceptable. And so we really had to take a deep dive into what was continuing to cause low quality CPR. We knew we had made significant gains because this is our fiscal year 17 compared to our fiscal year 21 events. So we had 10 additional events captured. We were getting the device to the bedside more regularly. And there's a lot more blue on that fiscal year 2021. So we had events that were absolutely meeting our goal, but we also still had events that were well below 10%. And those were the events we were curious about. And so we really started taking a deep dive with our clinical staff. We pulled together a team of bedside clinicians from our most common areas where events happen and who were on our resuscitation team. And we process mapped our entire process to identify gaps. And we identified some significant gaps in addition to the fact that we weren't following feedback because we couldn't get the defibrillator to the bedside. Age was a huge component. The younger you were, the worse CPR you were receiving. And so it allowed us to really start focusing our efforts on how do we get our feedback device to the bedside regularly? How do we modify our CPR technique for our infant population? Because that was the population that was the bulk of our very low quality compressions. So in our deep dive, we found that there was an inconsistent location for our defibrillator. It didn't have a place at the table. It didn't have a place in the room that was dedicated. It was oftentimes behind the compressors, so they couldn't even see where it was at and what feedback they were getting. wasn't always placed on the patient because it wasn't easy to get into the room. Stools were not readily available, and we had frequent pauses in compressions for placement of backboard and then placement of pads for procedures, for intubation, for extended pulse checks, various things like that. And so we started on our next phase in our roadmap of code choreography. And we stole shamelessly from Johns Hopkins, and I have to give a big shout out to Betsy Hunt and her team, because they really are the ones that created this cart. We modified it a bit because we really needed to have a step stool readily available, and we wanted it in the cart. And so we made a modification. We created this choreography. Creative is a loose term. We stole shamelessly from Johns Hopkins because they had figured it out. And if you have not had the opportunity to read Betsy Hunt's Code ACES paper, it is a great paper for how, you know, one institution made significant changes. And so we took from that and started implementing pieces of that. So with our choreography, the expectation is that this cart, our Zoll used to be on our actual large code cart. And so we removed it from there and placed it onto this cart here. And the expectation is this is brought in, and it has a small footprint and it's tall. And so it goes right under the bedside monitor so that our team leader and recorder at the foot of the bed have direct line of sight of not only our vital signs, but our arterial blood pressure, if we have an A line, of our Zoll for all of our CPR quality indicators. So it's this direct line of sight. And then we created the choreography around that. Ultimately, what this group of clinicians agreed on is that the Zoll needed a place at the adult table, right? Like at holidays, we have the kids table and the adult table. And oftentimes the Zoll wasn't even making it to the kids table. And so our team decided we got to get this device at the bedside in a very dedicated place. And so we implemented this. And we actually piloted this in our pediatric ICU and our cardiac ICU. And so that's where the bulk of now this work that I'm talking about was initially done. We also, based off of some of the adult work showing that faster release of compressions can potentially lead to improved outcomes. There's one paper that says it absolutely does, and there's one paper that showed a trend towards improved outcomes. But we really wanted to take from that adult literature and say, you know, is there an opportunity for us to modify the way that we're doing compression and achieve higher velocities of release on our patients? And so we started teaching a modified CPR technique, really ensuring that high quality CPR is happening every single time. So this was kind of a picture that we showed our staff. Both hands and fingers are open, allowing for kind of a better pivot. Your fingers remain on the patient's chest, and you're not lifting your hand all the way off, although we do have some compressors that do need to do that to achieve high quality CPR. And on the upstroke of that compression, we are having them lift the palm off of the patient's chest at the end to really have this small space. We used to call them credit card swipe compression. So, you know, swipe that credit card underneath your hand. That's all the space that you need. But it's forcing you as a compressor to get your weight fully off that patient's chest. And we really taught them what might seem very obvious to all of us on this call as people dedicated and passionate about resuscitation. We needed to make sure that every single compression was perfect. And so how all three of our components of compressions interplay together, but also the importance of them. So the correct depth is perfusing your brain. The full recoil, fast and quick recoil, is perfusing the heart. And so we taught and still teach this idea of brain, heart, brain, heart, brain, heart. As you're doing compressions, each of them are equally important, and really giving staff that visual of what am I perfusing with each piece of my CPR that I'm doing. We also then started shifting as this kind of all happened as a book project. This is a multi-faceted approach that we've taken on our roadmap. We really started to shift our focus to physiologic indicators and really removing the solid box of guidelines and saying you start in guidelines and then you look and see how your patient is responding based off of diastolic arterial blood pressure if you have one, and if you don't have that, then end tidal. And you then make modifications to your CPR to meet the needs of that patient based off of the physiologic indicators that they're providing. And this is the diastolic arterial blood pressure is the gold standard for pediatrics, and so that is our goal if we have that. And so to make sure that we all have a shared mental model, we created these CPR goals that are going to be going on the side of those carts with the defibrillator so that our compressors and those they're coaching them can have the exact goals that we have. So what we tell our staff is if you have an A line, that's what is guiding CPR quality. If you don't have that, end tidal. If your end tidal is not really reading all that great, then we expect AHA perfect CPR based off the feedback device. And then to really encourage that, we changed our code documentation. We still are on paper to really show the importance of those physiologic indicators. So anything that's in purple, which I know it's hard to read, but it's an arterial diastolic or an arterial pressure, an end tidal, and then if you're doing compression, is done every 1 minute during the resuscitation. So we have that physiologic goal being documented every single minute during the resuscitation. And then we also, a part of high quality CPR is minimizing pauses. And so really, this is our initial data with pause time. So 27-second pause, 9-second pre-shock pause. This is some significant opportunities on the screen here. And so really getting people to shift their focus into providing perfect CPR consistently until RASC is achieved with minimal interruptions. And how do we do that? So we've already talked about physiologic indicators. We've talked about modified CPR technique. We've talked about coaching each other. That is something that Betsy Hunt out of Johns Hopkins developed and is showing such promise on improving CPR quality. We are definitely seeing it at our institution. So we have all of these different components we've put into place. We've started to give feedback on data. We have, allowed them to practice perfectly through quarterly training. And yet we still are having pauses that are what you see on the screen. And so what we did is we really gave them tips and tricks, exact ways in their report cards that I showed you, as well as our training sessions that we do with simulation and resuscitation champions, which I'll speak to in a minute, to really go through how do we minimize pause time. We want them to use our filtered EKG tracing. We want them to find the pulse during compression so that we can have, a very short pause on, pause compressions. Do you feel the pulse still or not? Continuous CPR while charging the defibrillator. And then people laugh at me, but it's true. No Hollywood style movie clearing for shocking. Really making sure that we're clear of the patient and safe, but we don't need to be 6 feet away from the patient. And here's our results. So here's a 3-second pause total for a shock. 1.5 second pre, 1.5 second post. And while we don't see this every time, I'm not going to paint this picture that this is every single event. We know it's possible. And that is all the staff need to hear. It's possible. We've done it twice. We're going to do it a 3rd time and a 4th time and a 5th time until it becomes the norm. 5-second pulse rhythm check. It's possible. And we've actually had some that are down to about 3 to 4 seconds. Again, it's not every one. We still have a long way to go, right? We still have lots of opportunities, but it is absolutely possible. And so that is what our staff needed to hear. So as we kind of close and start to show kind of the data as we from all of this work we've done. And I always like to remind people, this has been a 10-year journey. We got feedback pads in 2015. We started collecting data at the end of 2016. This is not something that happened overnight. And that's why I go back to that Everest, Mount Everest. If you are starting at the very beginning, just choose something and start collecting data and take the baby steps. You may already be well ahead and nothing that I've shared is helpful. That's okay too. You've figured it out, right? And I want to hear from you because we're still figuring it out. But this is the most recent event from our pediatric ICU. And this was a physician who was bound and determined. She has been working for 5 years to get 100% for CPR quality. And so you can see that we have a lot of blue on here. The bottom part with this release velocity, you don't see blue dots because it's well above what is shown here. And they used an arterial diastolic blood pressure to guide their CPR quality. It is very clearly documented in the note. CPR coached to a diastolic blood pressure of. And overall, this team achieved a CPR quality of 97.4%. So again, doesn't mean it happens every time, but it is possible to do it. And so now this is our goal. This is our overall CPR quality in our PICU since fiscal year 17. So those initial events of about 4% were all from PICU except for one. And so this is where the bulk of our work has been done in the last 2 years, as I shared. And so you can see that we kind of hobbled along from fiscal year 17 to fiscal year 20. And in fiscal year 20 is when we made a lot of those significant changes. And you can see we have this incredible jump of their quality, and they are currently at about 75% overall quality. But what we're now able to do with this team is dive in and look at specifics. So we just had an event that has lower quality CPR than we were happy about. So we were able to look at the specifics around that event, and they're all now going through simulations focused on that exact event. And so we're able to make those real-time, very rapid cycle changes based off of their data. This is our organization-wide CPR quality as well as our outcomes. And so our CPR quality organizationally is at about 50% currently. That's actually fiscal year 23 just ended. So that ended at 41%. We're about 4 months into fiscal year 24, and we actually have an overall quality of 87% in our PICU and about 60% organizationally. And all of that work we did in the PICU is now being transferred over to other units to really continue this culture of ongoing resuscitation excellence. And the bars there are survival to hospital discharge. And what this is really translating into, which makes me incredibly happy and keeps me going every single day, is that this means 10 to 12 additional children are going home every year and celebrating birthdays and holidays and having a life with their family. And so with that, I'm going to end with the quote that keeps me going every single day. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. So thank you so much for your time. My email is there. Please feel free to reach out to me. And I so appreciate the time that you've taken with us this morning. Thank you so much. Bridget, back to you.
Thanks so much, Jen. That was absolutely amazing. I feel like I learned a lot, and everyone did. We've got a ton of questions, but before we get to the questions, I just want to remind you guys about how to get your CE credits. So again, this activity has been approved for 1 contact hour. So you just go to www.saxtesting.com/rev. You just need to register on the test site, complete the evaluation form, and upon successful submission, you'll be able to print your CE certificate. And just as a reminder, this educational activity was provided and supported by Zoll Medical Corporation. So thank you, Zoll. As well, if you want to watch it after the fact, if you came in late, there is an archived / on-demand version that's available on www.revive-now.org. And that will be accredited for nurses and respiratory therapists, both to obtain CEs. So without much further ado, we have a ton of questions. I'm going to try and, I combined a couple of them together. I was trying to get them all down so we hit them. One of the first questions was that I don't think we hit, but for neonates, are we currently compressing a 3-to-1 compression to breath?
So I cannot really speak to what we should be doing in the neonatal ICU. I think that it is very institutional based, and there's not great science right now to suggest when we should be switching from NRP to PALS. So this is an ongoing national debate, but I would say talk to your institutional experts. That's what we are in the process of doing, and really deciding based off of physiology, diagnosis, age, size, what is the most appropriate for that child.
All right, perfect. So we also have a couple of questions related to, one was, do your feedback devices that you use with your CPR challenge, and then also, you know, in IRL, in real life, as the kids say, do they correlate with end tidal CO2 during the events? And it's a double-sided question. And do you find that they interfere at all with any audible sounds or images during resuscitation?
Great question. So, of course, imaging, you know, if we have a pad on the chest that's not radiolucent, you're trying to do imaging, that can be challenging. For POCUS, like point of care cardiac ultrasound, we do that periodically, and we will just, if need be, remove the pad for that. Oftentimes, though, the way the pads are placed, they're able to maneuver around that and get what they need. As far as end tidal, we do, and I had a slide, but I removed it for purposes of time. We do, when we have the end tidal on our feedback device, we do see, like with our CPR quality increasing, you can see the end tidal correlating with that. We don't get end tidal regularly on our PEDS patients. A lot of our ET tubes are very, very small. They get skunked up with stuff, pulmonary edema. And so it's like this constant battle of having to switch out the end tidal adapter. But we have not had issues with people complaining about the audible sounds. If anything, people ask me to turn the volume up more. And with the choreography, I can say that that has really helped because it gets the device right up towards the head of the bed. And so the pads are right there, the end tidal cable is right there, and then the compressor and ventilator and coach are really able to be the ones that are hearing the feedback and focusing on it, and allows everybody else to not worry about that.
Yeah, the closer
that answered that question.
Yeah, the more likely you're going to use it, and then it's going to be useful.
Exactly.
So there were a couple of questions about mechanical CPR, but so do you use mechanical CPR devices?
We do not.
Yeah,
we do not, because they're not FDA approved for pediatrics. So I cannot speak to them. Talk to your vendors. That's what I'll tell you to do.
Yeah. Well, and there was a follow-up that they were asking about using mechanical CPR with your feedback device with a different company's product, with the Lucas device. So just for the feedback regarding that question, because it's not approved on children, you wouldn't be utilizing it. But with the Lucas device, they suggest you trend end tidal CO2, which we were just talking about, is another way to look at CPR quality.
Yep.
So there was another question. A couple people were asking about the goal arterial blood pressure.
Yes.
During that. So what do you want to shoot for if there's an A-line present, or what are you going to use? Yeah,
so the published document, and I can make sure that we get that publication out to the group, is by Berg, and it shows for infants a diastolic arterial blood pressure of greater than 25, and for children over 1, a diastolic arterial blood pressure of greater than 30 is associated with improved outcomes. And so that's what we shoot for. But ultimately, we know that a number does not always translate to that patient's clinical condition. And so we're really encouraging our resuscitation team at the bedside to have that conversation and have a shared mental model of what our goal blood pressure is, and then coaching to that blood pressure.
Okay, perfect. And that actually brings up the next question. There was a couple of questions regarding, do you have a specified like CPR coach going into these events? Like, does somebody already know I'm going to be the coach to provide that CPR feedback, or do you kind of rely on whoever's, compressing, and then, and maybe someone doing ventilations and then kind of go for there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're actually, reading my mind as to what our next steps are, because we are actively in discussions about how do we have a formal coach responding to every single cardiac arrest event within our institution. Right now, how we have it functioning is that we have our compressor, and then the person that's in line to take over compressions is the one giving the coaching, because they're the ones that are then going to tap out our compressor. So we do CPR tap out based off of objective data. You get tapped on your shoulder, they say, I'm tapping you out, and there's no questions asked. We're switching, 1, 2, 3, switch. And so that's how we have it set up right now. And then the person that was doing compressions and goes to the end of the line, and that next person starts compressions, next person in line now becomes the coach. So the compressors are coaching each other. And we've had some great success with that. We had a coach in that setting of that 97.4% event. So we are seeing some really great results with that coach being there. Excellent. But yes, ideally, a dedicated coach would be perfect, because you can focus all of your training on the exact way that you coach to a small set of people. So that is what our goal is. Build that muscle memory. So exactly. Exactly.
On autopilot. Perfect.
Yep.
So there was another question that just came in that's asked about feedback devices with, does it help with compression, depth, and timing of recoil? And if it doesn't, how are you guiding this performance in real time? Like, are you able to see it?
Yeah, so our feedback devices that we use, and I think all the feedback devices out there are pretty similar in the feedback they provide. Ours have a metronome set at a rate of 105. And so that's on continuously. And then it shows the actual rate that the compressor is compressing and the actual depth that they are achieving. With our adult pads, we also get a release bar, which gives kind of the speed of the release. It doesn't numerically give it, but you want that completely filled. And then there's a perfusion index diamond. And so we have taught our staff to look at that feedback, look at our arterial blood pressure, our end tidal, and say, okay, what do we need to coach to? If they're compressing too shallow, the feedback device will say push harder. What I have had to teach the staff is, I jokingly say, there's a communication issue. Most of the time when we're not achieving the depth, the measured depth that we want, it's because we're leaning. And so I am really telling our staff that the very first thing we coach to is full rapid release with our modified CPR technique. And if we do that, it really, like, almost 100% of the time, everything else falls into place. All of a sudden our depth is achieved, our rate slows down because you can't lift your palm off the hand, off the chest, and achieve a rate of 140. And so we really have focused on the release component.
Yeah, and I think that's a challenge for, adults, adult providers and pediatric providers alike. I think it's that release. Yep. That's, refilling those coronary arteries is so important.
Exactly.
All those steps that everyone's so focused on the rate and the depth that they forget about the release.
Yeah, so we will say to them, like, I know AHA says correct rate, correct depth, full release. I'm like, that's not the order that we look at this in. It is full rapid release, correct depth, because that's the perfusion piece. The rate is there in my mind. I am not speaking on AHA's behalf here, so make that abundantly clear. In my mind, the rate has to be at that rate to achieve these other two things. And so we have had events that come across at 0% quality, and I look, and the depth is perfect 90% of the time. We had an event on a teenager about a year ago. Depth was 100%. Rate was writing at like 125. Release was consistently well above the 400. And the staff were devastated initially. And I said, no. Don't be devastated. Let's take a step back. Is rate what's perfusing the brain and heart? No. What's perfusing the patient's brain? Our depth. Well, that was 100%. What's perfusing the patient's heart? Our release. Well, that was 100%. So you actually perfuse this patient perfectly. And that patient, after going on to ECMO, being resuscitated, going on to ECMO, walked out of our hospital neurologically intact. And so that is why we focus so heavily on release and depth. Rate is kind of a secondary in my mind.
That's excellent and very accurate. I've never really thought about it in that way. I'm going to read this next question because I don't want to butcher it, and it's a great question. So someone wrote in and said, in FY20, you guys had a 23% CPR quality and 55% cardiac arrest survival to discharge. But in FY21, you had 43% quality and 50% survival to DC. So despite a significant improvement in CPR quality, there was a slight decrease in survival to discharge. Did you examine what factors beyond CPR quality might have played a role in those outcomes?
Great question. And you know what? I ask myself the same thing every darn day. So an important piece of our survival to hospital discharge data that's presented in this presentation is it is unadjusted, which means it includes the out of hospital patient that was found down for an hour that we get ROSC on, that they're never going to make it out of the hospital. It includes everyone. And so when we adjust, the American Heart Association does like a risk adjusted survival, which makes that a little bit more accurate. I just didn't have it on this presentation. We are consistently seeing an upward trend. So we started at about 32% risk adjusted survival, and this last year we were at 46% risk adjusted survival. I think that our acuity and our just the patient acuity and the amount of critical care patients that we've had within our institution is significant. We also became a tier 1 or a level 1 trauma center. So we got a lot more sick traumas. And so I do think that that is playing into some of this plateauing despite our CPR quality increasing. And I always tell people, there's so many things that go into survival. While that is the golden coin that we want, we have to make sure everything is right for survival, and that's what we're working on. So we just had an event that kid came in, arrested in our ED, got 91% CPR quality, went to our PICU with perfect post-arrest care guideline, like textbook. I was so proud of them. And the kid walked out of our hospital, neurologically intact. And so there's so much that goes into survival. So we also really heavily focus also from a CPR quality perspective on ROSC, which I know is not super popular, but
it is, but it is what you look at. So yeah. Thank you guys so much. Jen, I learned so much from you, and I think everyone else has today. This was awesome. So I'm just going to turn it over to Tracy for the last information about the contact hours.
Thank you, Bridget, and thanks, Jen. We'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Immediately upon the conclusion of this webinar, you'll be presented with an online survey. Please keep your web browser open and we appreciate your feedback. In 1 hour following the conclusion of this webinar, you'll receive an email with instructions and this link to obtain your CE credits. For nurses and RTs, please visit www.saxtesting.com/REV. And with that, this concludes our webinar for today. We hope everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you.